Hello and welcome to this video on doing a chi-square test using G-Power. So for our research scenario, we have, is there a relationship between leadership role, where our leadership roles are supervisor, manager, and CEO, and leadership style, transformational, transactional, and servant. So we have three groups in each one of our different variables or categorical variables. So we have two categorical variables with three groups, supervisor, manager, CEO for the first one, and transformational, transactional, servant for the second one. So something we need to do is come up with our degrees of freedom. And this is just the normal degrees of freedom for a chi-square. So we take the number of groups in the first variable, minus 1, and then multiply it by the number of groups in the second variable, minus 1. So 3 minus 1 is 2, 3 minus 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. Now, what if we decided instead of having 3, what if we took out CEO? So let's pretend we didn't have CEO. We'll just go ahead and there we go, it's gone. What would you do with your degrees of freedom? Well, in this case, then it would be 2 minus 1 because we would just have supervisor and manager. So 2 minus 1 is 1, 3 minus 1 is 2, 1 times 2, and our degrees would now be a 2 instead of a 4. So I just wanted to kind of show you, the difference, depending on what you're doing, so that way you would know. But let's go ahead and put everything back the way we had it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do our G-Power. So for this one, we are going with the x squared or the chi-square tests, and we are doing the goodness of fit test contingency tables. So nicely enough, it's just this first one right here. Now for effect size, we are going to go ahead and leave it at the medium effect size. So the default right here from G-Power, we're going to leave it there. Our alpha error of probability, always 0.05, so we're good there. And then remember, for our power, we always want it to be 0.80. And that was something that we talked about in the lecture when we were talking about power and sample size and effect size. We always want our power to be 0.80. So you want to change it to 0.80. It could also be 0.8. It really doesn't matter. You're going to get the same answer, whether it's 0.8 or 0.80. I don't know. I just like 0.80. And then go ahead and enter in your degrees of freedom, which we calculated was 4, and then click calculate. So you can see that our total sample size is 133 for this particular research scenario. Now, if we, for example, remember we had 2 in that other scenario we kind of came up with, if we went to 2, you can see that's going to knock it down to 108. So that degrees of freedom, right, the higher the degrees of freedom, the higher your sample size. So take that back up to 4, which is what we needed, and it's 133. So just keep in mind, depending on your number of groups in each of your categorical variables, it could really make for a relatively bigger sample size. So for example, if you had 6, you're going to get up to 152. Now that's not a huge sample size, but depending on the population you're sampling from, it could be kind of big. All right, so how do we write this up? So for our written results, remember these are our written results both for our discussion in our class, but also if you are doing a quantitative IRB or a quantitative chapter 3, you will need to include this information. So it's important regardless of whether you're doing it for our class discussion or for your dissertation. So our research question, is there a relationship between leadership role and leadership style? Our statistical test is a chi-square test. You do need to include the purpose of using G-Power. Now we did talk about that in that previous video, but you need to add your own information here with a citation. So really important, make sure to add your own information with a citation. Now the actual kind of meat and potatoes, so to speak, of like what is the G-Power results, you would say for this research question, a G-Power analysis was done a priori to establish a rigorous sample size, where your power is 0.80, effect size equals 0.3, alpha is 0.05. The results from G-Power indicated a minimum sample size of 133, and then see Appendix X. And that see Appendix X is important because this is this actual screenshot of your G-Power output. That is what goes in your appendix, and you need to include it both for our discussion as well as if you were doing that quantitative IRB, quantitative chapter 3, all of those things, you have to include this G-Power output. So make sure you get that screenshot and you include it both for the discussion and any other time you're doing G-Power potentially for your dissertation. So that's it. If you have any questions, just let me know.